This Holy Week's theme that we've been looking at has been that of Christ's wisdom versus human wisdom. We started with Palm Sunday, where we looked at the wisdom of Christ versus the wisdom of the crowd. And then we moved on to Maundy, Thursday, where we talked about the wisdom of Christ versus the wisdom of the apostles. Then we moved on to Good Friday, where we talked about the wisdom of Christ versus the wisdom of those in power. And each time we saw how these different groups failed to get what was going on right in front of them, right? The crowd was so obsessed with screaming so loud, either Hosanna on Palm Sunday or crucify him on Good Friday, that they never stopped to actually listen to anyone. They were just too busy screaming into the world. Enthusiasm or hatred. Back and forth. We then talked about how on Maundy, Thursday, of all these apostles who've walked with Jesus for 3 years at this point, who have heard 20 plus times that he is the Messiah and that the Messiah is going to die and the Messiah is going to raise and it's going to be okay, but he's definitely not a military leader who's leading a political revolution. And all of them on this day were very sad that their military revolution failed. Why? Because they were so convinced they knew how the world worked. Their core values and core assumptions were so held on to so dearly that when Christ said, guys, we got to think outside of the box, I'm doing something that's not what you think I'm doing. No matter how many times he said it to them over the years, they simply never heard him. On Good Friday, we heard from Pilate and Herod, these well-educated, well-connected, well-off people. And how their arrogance made them look at this carpenter and think to themselves, what could he have to offer besides being a white elephant gift that we can send back and forth to each other as a joke? We've heard all through Holy Week how humans didn't get it. But knowing how we didn't get it doesn't help us understand how to get it, right? I know a ton of ways not to put in a light bulb. It doesn't mean you know how to actually put in a light bulb, right? But today we get an example of a group of people who got it, at least eventually. And that is the group of women, right? When Joseph of Arimathea comes up and says, hey, dude, I'm feeling really guilty because I could have stopped all this because I'm part of the Sanhedrin, but I just went ahead and was silent when horrible things were happening, so I let it just sort of happen, but I feel bad, so I'll take the body and I'll give him a good burial. What were the women doing? They were curious to see what was going to happen. So they sort of followed Joseph around. Was Pilate going to kill him? That's a possibility. Were the Sanhedrin going to go ahead and try him? Well, that's a possibility. Could Jesus have woken up from the cross and been like secretly, ha, I'm not dead? That was a possibility. They wanted to see what might happen. They were curious. And so they follow him, they lay him in the tomb, and they're like, well, that's sort of what we expected. And so I can almost picture what this morning must have been like. One woman turns to the other and goes, oh, it's early. We really doing this? Everyone's like, yeah, we probably should. Everyone's like, we're going to find a dead body. The other person's like, I know, that's why we have all the perfume. We can always stick it under our nose like the EMTs do. Yeah, that's going to be bad. Well, we should probably at least give it a shot. Another person's probably like, really? Because we're just going to find a dead body. We all know what that looks like. They said, but what if? What if we don't? See, it was that lingering doubt, that lingering curiosity of what happens if what we expect to have happen doesn't? What happens if all these insane things Jesus spoke about actually come true? They believed it enough at least to go on a walk and go there. They were probably like, well, we're on a walk. If all else fails, we'll get a good walk in this morning. Our step goal will be that much closer. And they head to the tomb. And it's because of that curiosity, because of that willingness to be open to the unexpected, because they actually went and looked, that they found the empty tomb. The apostles, they slept in this morning because they were very sure what they were going to find. Now, it's worth noting there's also another person who goes to the tomb this morning. It's Peter, of all people. Last we left Peter, he was bitterly weeping after denying Jesus for 3 times. Not doing so great. And yet, he's the only apostle that when the women come back and they say, guys, we went there, we saw, the tomb is empty, there were like angel people there who said, he's gone before you to Galilee, we should all go to Galilee. He's the only person who at any point goes, yeah, Jesus sort of said something about that, I should go check that out. The rest of them are like, that's a tall tale, get away from me, women. That's the thing. Peter actually decides he's going to run there because he is just curious enough to take a look. But why him and not the other apostles? I think it's because of what happened on Maundy Thursday. Curiosity is often founded and created by pain in our lives. See, at the beginning of the story, Peter was like the rest of the apostles. He was just like, yep, I know what's going to happen. I got my sword, ready for a military revolution. And then when it didn't occur, he was horribly embittered. That's why he denies Jesus 3 times before the cock crows. But in that moment, they say Jesus makes eye contact with him. And he remembers what Jesus had said. And then he wept bitterly. It was in that moment of pain that he realized just maybe, his core assumptions weren't making sense anymore. Because nothing was happening the way a good political revolution should. It was all falling apart. But somewhere deep down, as that crack developed, that uncertainty, that cognitive dissonance, whatever you want to call it, was happening. That moment of pain. It cracked open something inside of Peter to make him curious, what's really going on? What's really happening? So I think this morning, when the women come back and they tell the apostles, and the other group of apostles are like, women and their gossip, Peter stops for a second and goes, before I just blow the women off, because that's our core idea here, I'm going to be curious, just in case they aren't lying. Well, he probably ran there expecting to find the body rolled to the side and hiding behind the couch or something. When he got there and he found the linen, he moved from a place where he didn't believe enough in the resurrection to look, to a place where he at least was very uncomfortably confused. See, in our society, when we feel discomfort or confusion or cognitive dissonance or, again, whatever you want to call it, we see it as bad. But we as Christians don't necessarily see it as bad. Because when the world does not make sense, when things aren't going the way we think they should, that is a calling upon ourselves to look at our core assumptions, look at our core values, and ask, what is God up to? It's a calling for us to be, as the women were, simply curious. When we live without curiosity, we live into pain that calls us to curiosity itself. So as you go out on this Easter day, as you're having all your fun Festivus and spending time with your families and doing all the great and amazing and awesome traditions you will do, take a little time in your life this week when things calm down, when silence befalls you for a moment, and ask yourself, how are you living into the curiosity of being a Christian? Amen.